Well, if we can go ahead and begin, and if the volume is too loud, let us know. There are speakers just in the center bit, and then as you go either to the back or to the front, the volume changes. And we also have a few, if you need some hearing assistance, we also have some more things. So if people will sit down. Would you like to sit with Velma? That would be great. That would be great. So. Very good. For those of you who don't know Velma, she is the matriarch of St. Isidore's Parish, and my hope is that you all get to know her during this time. So she is a wonderful person. I want to begin with the prayer, and you'll have a handout, which is Psalm 139. But I just want to say a word about the Psalms before we do that prayer. There are, as you know, 150 Psalms in the Old Testament, and they're believed to have been written by King David. And for the church, from its earliest days, these Psalms provided for a way to make holy the day, dividing it into hours of prayer known as the Divine Office. In the hours of the Divine Office, the Psalms are recited, and there are Old and New Testament readings along with canticles and songs. And the two main hours of the church's life of prayer, or her liturgical prayer, are morning prayer, which you may have heard of as lauds, and evening prayer, which is vesper. Psalm 139, which we'll recite soon, is considered one of the most touching psalms on God's divine presence and knowledge. This great and self-evident truth that God knows our hearts and the hearts of all is an appropriate prayer for us to use during this year. So we will pray this psalm, but we will do it side to side. So right down the line here, every table to this side to my right will be side 1, and everyone in tables to my left will be side 2. And the tradition of praying the Psalms side to side or choir to choir is that in praying the Psalm, you're always either speaking or hearing, either preaching and proclaiming or receiving and praying. So let us pray. And this side will be side 1, and you'll see the Psalm is divided into 6 stanzas with little double tilde at the end. So you'll know this side goes through verses 1 to 6, and then we'll hop over here to side 2. Very easy. Let us begin. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down, when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar away. You search out my path when I lie down. The beautiful thing about King David's Psalms and the way in which they provide solace, there are a variety of Psalms to choose to pray. So if you're wondering, I need some help in praying, go to the Psalms. They're just a rich resource. So, who am I? Who am I? Well, that is one of life's big questions. Generally, when I meet someone on a plane or at a social event and they want to know me, I tell them things about me. I'm the new pastor at St. Isidore's. I'm a Catholic priest and a religious of the Dominican order for about 40 years. I tell them I am a teacher and preacher. If they haven't walked off by this point, I might start to tell them about places I've lived, like Illinois and Indiana, Oklahoma and New Mexico, Louisiana and Michigan, Belgium, the United Kingdom, and now Kansas. I learned from living in England that cultures differ on just how much they really want to know you. The British have a disdainful indifference to anything overly familiar. Knowing you must happen over time or a pint of beer at the pub. Now, all of this stuff is about me. But who I am, the me that I think nobody knows, is really so much more. I recall vividly with my true friends those moments where I realized that over time they had come to know me, even in a sense how I tick, sometimes knowing me more than I knew myself. True friends are the ones who can tell you when you're not being yourself. So even though I introduce myself telling people things about me, and truly they are part of who I am, that has and continues to shape me, but they are only part of it. It's like taking a journey. The great classical quest of Galahad to find the Holy Grail, or Dorothy for somewhere over the rainbow. The journey is only part of the reality. What is more important is what one becomes. This is what a pilgrimage is like. Now, this past year, a group of students and parishioners I know from Washington University in St. Louis walked the Camino de Santiago in Spain, a path that has been taken by Christians since the 9th century to the shrine where they believe St. James died. When they came back, you could tell that the experience had changed them. Well, that is kind of what the RCIA is all about. A journey, a pilgrimage that changes us. So before we go any further, I'd like to take just a little time and do a go-around. So at this point, I'm going to ask you to turn off the recorder so we don't have to worry about that. So poor Nancy has to run back and forth. And what I'd like us to do on this go-around, it's just very kind of simple. I'd like to Great. Well, thank you all for sharing that. And it's a way for us to start to get to know one another, because part of this process is building community as well. And now that we've started to know one another, I better tell you a bit about the RCIA, since that's why you're here. And no, it has nothing to do with the Central Intelligence Agency. any more than the CIA has to do anything with real intelligence. The RCIA stands for the Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults. Now, that involves several key terms. This is about adult faith, an adult choice about the direction and future of your life. It is about one's initiation into the Christian faith, into the community of believers gathered by Christ into His household. And it involves a religious act, a rite of the church, a sacrament that we believe has an impact in a person's life. Now, allow me to say a bit more about the RCIA as process, journey, and destiny. I'm writing super large, so the camera, I hope, will be able to pick it up. It's terrible when you write too small and nobody can see what it is. So RCIA is a process. There is a necessary process of sharing with you the teachings of the church, the faith handed on over centuries, the preaching of the gospel. Since the earliest days of the church, this instruction was handed on orally. It was communicated person to person. That's why it's important. An important part of this process is your being here. Being here with your sponsors. Being here with others who are seeking. Being here with those who have been living the faith and who want to share it with you. Now, the Greek word for spoken instruction in English is catechesis. Catechesis. You'll hear that word a lot this year. Catechesis. Which means according to what is said or spoken. Now, a better way to think about catechesis is that it is about conversation and conversion. Conversation and conversion. Hearing, questioning, asking, thinking, rethinking, and reshaping oneself, changing, becoming the you God has called you to be. So the RCIA is a process that unfolds. But the RCIA is also a journey. Now, the imagery of a journey is an apt one for the RCIA, and we seek to accomplish particular goals of a journey. Part of it is a time to examine your own life journey, where you have been, where you are, and where you are headed. Now, with most trips, you pack, right? To go on a trip, you pack. But on a spiritual journey, such as this one has to unpack. We open ourselves, discard and clean out our baggage, allowing the Holy Spirit to guide us along, discovering how God has been there in our inmost being, from the moment we were fashioned in our mother's womb, to recall Psalm 139. Now, in her book, Forming Intentional Disciples, Sherry Waddell describes the journey as a path to knowing and following Jesus. Very simple. A path to knowing and following Jesus. This journey is about an encounter, a courtship of sorts. Sherry tells us that a person crosses various thresholds on the journey. Now, thresholds are really amazing realities in our life. They are places in between one room and another, one way of living and another. Crossing a threshold is a major part of one's life, and it requires leaving behind some things and embracing others. Now, she describes 5 thresholds that are helpful for us to be aware of as they are part of each one of our journeys. So the first threshold that she talks about is initial trust, an initial trust. And what she means by that is every teacher faces the awkward initial weeks of a semester as students size up their prof. They critically notice all the flaws and missteps of their prof, saying to themselves, I know more than this jerk. But it takes time to move from that initial natural skepticism to opening the doors to trust. One steps across the threshold, leaving behind the masters of suspicion, and one begins to risk. She writes, trust is not the same as active personal faith. Without some kind of bridge of trust in place, people will not move closer to God. Part of the trust, part of what we're doing is opening a threshold, a door, to help you in your journey to come closer to God and to know God. The second threshold that she talks about, so initial trust, the second threshold is spiritual curiosity. Is that working, Velma? A little better. We'll have to... This is one of my best students, so... So when we come to this threshold of a spiritual curiosity, here is where a person starts to move toward wanting to know more about Jesus, his life, his teaching, and aspects of the Christian faith. Curiosity on your part is not commitment. This is an open journey for you. Curiosity is not commitment. It shows an interest, but it's not yet ready for personal change. And yet, it is something more than mere trust. So that second threshold is the spiritual curiosity. The third threshold she speaks about is spiritual openness. And what that means, and what I invite you to think about, is a person acknowledges to herself or himself and to God that she or he is open to the possibility of personal and spiritual change. There has to be an openness. This is one of the most difficult transitions for a non-believer. Being open is not a commitment to change. It's simply your recognizing that there is a possibility of change. Maybe yes, maybe no. So some of you coming here tonight may be thinking, oh my gosh, I've already committed myself. This is an open-ended journey for you, and there are various thresholds to cross. And to be open to that and to listen where God is calling you in the midst of this journey. The fourth threshold that she speaks about is spiritual seeking. And by spiritual seeking, what she means is that this threshold involves a shifting from being passive to actively seeking to know God who's calling you forth. Seekers are asking, is this where I'm being called? That's part of what the journey is. Is this where I'm being called? And can I commit to Christ in His church? So those four thresholds bring us to the fifth threshold, which is a significant one, and that she talks about intentional discipleship. To be intentional disciples gathered around the gospel. And that's the point where each one of us makes a decision. That's where we, over this process, this journey, this pilgrimage, begin to ask, what is my choice? What will I decide? To make a conscious commitment to follow Jesus in the midst of His church as an obedient disciple, and to reorder one's life accordingly. So the catechesis is about both conversation and ongoing exploration and discovery, but it's also about conversion. This threshold brings us to the third part of the RCIA. So process, journey. The third part I want you to think about is destiny. And not Destiny's Children or whatever that singer or song is or whatever. Just destiny. So think about the RCIA as destiny. Now this is part of the RCIA which is about our ultimate meaning, our ultimate purpose in life. After having gone through the initial rites, bringing you to the font of baptism and a commitment and becoming a Christian, it's really a sense of where you're ultimately ordered, how you're going to ultimately live the full meaning of your life. Now, the medieval writers had this wonderful little saying, plant an act, reap a habit. Plant a habit, reap a virtue. Plant a virtue, reap a destiny. Part of what the RCIA as a destiny is helping us to see how our actions, how we've lived our life, have established habits which are good habits and habits which are bad habits. And the good habits lead us to a strength of character, to a virtue. And that virtue directs us ultimately to the destiny, which is that sense of oneness and union with God. So being able to appreciate that part of this reality of the RCIA is that it's for something that's far beyond what this world is all about. There is an ultimate purpose in what you're about. So being able to kind of have a sense there is a way in which we are the one that God has entrusted with the ultimate destiny. Each one of you is so loved by God that God has entrusted you with the ultimate destiny of your life and given you the freedom to choose what direction to go. The RCIA is about a lifelong, ongoing discovery of who you really are. Who am I? That big question of life. The you that God has called you to be. You'll never reach your destination unless you embark on the journey. You'll never reach your destination until you embark on the journey. St. Augustine says, the victor's crown belongs only to one who has run the race. The RCIA is about getting us to the end goal, to the place where we are called to be. Now, part of what I'm doing this year is involving the team in various what I'm calling cameo appearances. So I'm sure you're going to get sick and tired of seeing me or Father Bob every week. So it's nice to have other faces coming up. So I've asked one of the team members to make a cameo appearance. Now his name is Brandon Wagner, and he was just married this summer. So that's good congratulations, Brandon. But he also went through the RCIA a few years ago and knows what a lot of you are wondering. So Brandon is a team member. He's here on Tuesday nights, but he's generously agreed to come tonight to share with you his story. So let's welcome Brandon and thank him for being part of this.
So I'm going to start out with a little caveat. I kind of have a bad tendency of, when I'm talking about spiritual things, of saying these just long monologues about things and never really actually getting to the point of what I'm trying to say. So I'll try and keep it pretty brief. But to start out, give you a little background on me before I started going through RCIA. My father was Catholic, but throughout the middle-aged part of his life, he sort of had a falling out and quit going to the Catholic Church. And then when I was born and we'd moved to a new place, they had started to try to go, but it just didn't work out for whatever reason, and to this day I don't know exactly why that is. But so I didn't go to church from probably first or second grade till about third or fourth grade. And then I remember my brother and sister and I were riding around in this parking lot of a Baptist church that was right by our house, and they invited us in to come in for summer school and talk and just learn. And so that's when I sort of accepted Jesus into my heart and sort of started to think about it in a little bit more mature of a sense. But I still didn't really have a church that I belonged to, and I knew I believed in God, and it was okay. Like, why did I need to go to church? I believe in God, and I know that He's the true power and everything, but I didn't feel like I needed to go to church. So anyway, and I had been singing up through about middle school, and then I had just stopped because I was good at math and science, and I wanted to be an engineer, so I needed to focus on doing those kind of things. So I quit singing, and then I had met a friend in middle school who was really into singing and acting, and he was very talented. Eventually convinced me to come and sing at his church for the cantata, which is the Christmas presentation that they do. So I went there, and the people in the choir were just excellent. They were wonderful to be around, and just made me really want to keep coming back. And so then I did that for maybe a year or two, and then I started going to church on Sunday, and then they just were really welcoming. So then I started to going to that church, and that was a Baptist church in the town that I graduated from. So then I went to college and met my lovely wife, and I like to think that we're pretty good about communicating, even though we're still really young. So we'd gotten to talk about kids and how we wanted to bring them up in the church, and we had decided that we wanted to be up here together even if we weren't both of the same denomination. So we had talked about it and hadn't really come to any kind of a conclusion at all. So she had this trip to Spain, which I can't remember the exact name of it, but it was a mission trip to Spain, and it was a 2-week trip over the summer. And then so I didn't have any contact with her for those 2 weeks, and then she came back, and I'm driving her back from the airport, and she says, "I'm not converting. I really believe and feel strongly about staying Catholic." And that was very, very hard to hear at the time, and because I'd sort of grown up that it was okay to do, whatever's right for you, as long as you believe in Christ is the big deal. But it was kind of sort of a rude awakening to sort of get that this is what I believe, and this is how I think that is the right way to do it, and it's how I'm going to do it. So at first it was really abrasive, but I sort of got to thinking about it a little more, and through coming to Mass here, and I'd actually been here when Father Keith was here just for a couple of times, and then Father Jarrett, and it was just really comfortable and down to earth, and he made jokes and really didn't have the stereotypes that I'd sort of not been taught, but sort of just picked up through life about the Catholic Church. And so sort of breaking down those walls and eventually thinking about it a little bit more and more, I felt like it was a step that I was ready to take. I was just ready to learn some more about the Catholic faith, and so I started going to RCIA and started learning about the depth of it and how there's so much meaning to everything you do. And that was one of the initial struggling points, was that, well, Catholics pray to Mary, they pray to other people instead of God. And I've obviously since learned that that's not exactly right. And just about every stereotype out there is just somebody who misunderstands what we're doing. And that sort of depth of knowledge and tradition and everything, and there's a reason why you stand up every time you stand up and a reason why you sit down. And so that really sort of is what kept me back, is that there's a whole rich tradition within the church that I can look to. And it's a body that's been together for a very long time, and it sort of, you're part of something bigger, which is really amazing, and that's why I stayed. Thank you. Sorry, I don't have a great introduction or way to bring you back up.
No, so you see that, I better turn this on. So you see that whole process and journey affects people in different ways, and it is a life-changing choice that we're talking about. And that's the beauty of this time together with one another. We're going to take a little break in a minute, but I want to do a few little housekeeping things. Restrooms are up in the lobby, so they're just to the left up there. And after the break, I'm going to talk to you about the binders, those nice white binders that have reams of paper in there that you're probably paging through and thinking, oh my God, do I have to read them next week? No, in about 3 weeks. No. So, and a reminder that you and your sponsor can come either to Tuesday night or to Wednesday night. So if something comes up that you can't make it on a Wednesday, that you can come on a Tuesday. We really encourage you. We want you to really be here. Be here. But, you know, sometimes depending on how things play out and how circumstances are, you might not be able to be here. So if you completely miss a week, we're taping the talks so that they'll be available on video. But again, I want to stress that what's really preferred is that you're here, that you come here and you're part of what this community of journeyers is all about. So here's the other great thing about the RCIA. If you like food, different kinds of food, sweets, and healthy different things, we have always got just a trough of really good, great things here. So we're going to take about a 10-minute break, and that's a chance to go and get a little something, fortify yourself. If you're missing your bed, eat a lot of M&Ms. So if you're, whatever you need, so coffee, tea, and all kinds of goodies. So we'll take about a 10-minute break. So great, enjoy. And thanks again, Brandon. We appreciate your being here. Cindy and... All right, well, I hope you all had a good little sugar dose to stay alert and active. All of you were given one of these great binders. I just want to go through it a little bit as we begin. So you'll see that on the front page you have a list of all of the classes and the sessions. And it also says what the readings are. So you'll notice next week we're dealing with God, the question of God. And they're only about 4 or 5 pages, so that's an easy read. But then the week after that it gets a little more and then a little more. So the nice thing about doing this with your sponsor, you can read it with one another and kind of share ideas. The other nice thing that I think is great about the binder is you can pull out the pages you need to read and then just read them when you got time. So it's really a convenient way instead of carrying the whole big binder around. If you look at the table of contents, you'll see that there are some things that are on the list that deserve very special attention. The fact is that this all leads up to the rite of acceptance, this whole first bit, which I'll say a little bit more about. The rite of acceptance, which is on December the 6th. But I got to tell you something. There's a potluck party. And what I've learned this summer from the team, the RCI team, they love to party. So you're just going to have some very nice parties. You should have a green tab that gives you the spring readings and list. Or red. Mine is green. Oh, so you have there's a tab somewhere in your book about midway. And then yours is orange. Velm, I think yours is orange. there. So, and then that gives the second semester. And here is the, if you are planning on not missing one day, mark your calendars to be sure to be here on March 22nd. That's the Seder meal. And that is one heck of a nice evening for both groups to get together. And you'll see as we go on the different events that are taking place in terms of the rite itself. In the back of your book, there are different resources, so additional reading and links to different sites. So there are a number of opportunities. Okay. You were also given, as you arrived, one of these wonderful goldenrod sheets. And so what we're looking for is people who are either here to be received into the Catholic Church or to be baptized or to be confirmed to fill out this side. And then if you have a sponsor or know who your sponsor is, your sponsor will fill out the back side. Geneva, we've got the people who didn't have a sponsor. Do people know who their sponsor is now? All right. So why don't you, can you, okay. So I think you two are going to be together. Is that what you're saying? We're all looking over in your direction, so I'm just guessing. So be sure by the end of this evening to have that filled out so we can collect those. All right, very good. Let's see. Again, if you're having problems hearing, the mic, the PAs, the speakers are all in that sweet spot. So everybody in that second row is just right underneath the speaker. But if you're having problems hearing, it can be because you're too far forward or too far back. And if you do need help, Velma has one of the hearing assistants, and we've kind of figured out how that is all going to work together. All right. So, just to recap from the first hour, the key to these classes is your questioning. That's key. Your questioning. Both within, is this where God is calling me to be? And without, what does that mean? Why do you do what you do with X, Y, or Z? Those questions are important things about what the Catholic Church is. So it's both a questioning from within and a questioning from without. So, now stories are an incredible way in which ideas and concepts are communicated. And sometimes a story ends up telling you so much more than a bunch of facts and information. So stories and narratives are very, very helpful to get us to think about things. And after all, when you think about it, the Bible is a collection of inspired stories about God's relationship with His people. So there is a 20th century writer, and some of you may have heard of him or know of him, named C.S. Lewis. You're familiar with C.S. Lewis, great writer. And he was from Northern Ireland, and he was an Anglican, Church of Ireland, who taught English at Oxford University. Now, he was a Christian apologist and part of a literary group known as the Inklings. J.J.R. Tolkien was another member of that group that would meet at a pub every week in Oxford. What a great way to have a little literary society. Now, two of Lewis's well-known works are The Chronicles of Narnia, which have been made into recent movies, and then another one called Mere Christianity. But there is another, perhaps lesser well-known work, which is called The Screwtape Letters. Have any of you heard of the Screwtape Letters? Oh, this is wonderful. This is wonderful. The Screwtape Letters are a fictional collection of correspondence from a senior devil named Screwtape to his nephew, a younger devil named Wormwood. It's written in 1941, and you'll be amazed at how much rings true to our own times. There's a warning I want to give, just some little background. Some terms you hear need a little bit of explaining. So pay attention. When Screwtape is talking about the enemy, he's talking about God. Okay, so that's good. He's talking about God. And when he talks about the weekly press, just include all the media, so you can appreciate that it's not just the newspaper. Also, the term materialism. We can understand materialism as a kind of secularism. Would you close the door, please? As a kind of secularism. That really says there's nothing beyond the material world. There is no heaven. There's nothing but just here and now. So I invite you to relax and sit back, because I want to share with you a section of the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. So that's why I wanted you all to have lots of sugar. All right. My dear Wormwood, I note that you say what you say about guiding your patient's reading and taking care that he sees a good deal of his materialist friends. But are you not being a trifle naive? It sounds as if you supposed that argument was the way to keep out the enemy's clutches on him. That might have been so if he had lived a century ago. At that time, the humans still knew pretty well when a thing was proved and when it was not. And if it was proved, they really believed it. They still connected thinking with doing and were prepared to alter their way of life as the result of a chain of reasoning. But what with the weekly press and other such weapons we have largely altered that. Your man has been accustomed, ever since he was a boy, to have a dozen incompatible philosophies dancing about together in his head. He doesn't think of doctrines as primarily true or false, but as academic or practical, outworn or contemporary, conventional, ruthless. Jargon, not argument, is your best ally in keeping him from the church. Don't waste time trying to make him think that materialism is true. Make him think that it is strong or stark or courageous, that it is the philosophy of the future. That's the sort of thing he cares about. The trouble about argument is that it moves the whole struggle unto the enemy's own ground. He can argue too, whereas in really practical propaganda of the kind I am suggesting, he has been shown for centuries to be greatly the inferior to our Father below. By the very act of arguing, you awake the patient's reason. And once it is awake, who can foresee the results? Even if a particular train of thought can be twisted so as to end in our favor, you will find that you have been strengthening in your patient the fatal habit of attending to universal issues and withdrawing his attention from the stream of the immediate sense experiences. Your business is to fix his attention on the stream. Teach him to call it real life, and don't let him ask what he means by real. Remember, he is not, like you, a pure spirit. Never having been a human, oh, that abomination advantage that the enemy has, you don't realize how enslaved they are to the pressure of the ordinary. I once had a patient, a sound atheist, who used to research at the British Museum. One day, as he sat reading, I saw a train of thought in his mind beginning to go wrong. The enemy, of course, was at his elbow in a moment. Before I knew where I was, I saw my 20 years' work beginning to totter. If I had lost my head and begun to attempt a defense by argument, I should have been undone. But I was not such a fool. I struck instantly at the part of the man which I had best under my control, and suggested it was just about time he had some lunch. The enemy presumably made the counter-suggestion. You know how one can never quite hear what he says to them. That this was more important than lunch. At least I think that must have been what his line was, for he said, "Quite. In fact," I told him, "much too important to tackle at the end of a morning." The patient brightened up considerably, and by the time I had added, "Much better come back after lunch and go into it with a fresh mind," he was already halfway to the door. Once he was in the street, the battle was won. I showed him a newsboy shouting the midday paper, and a number 73 bus going by. And before he reached the bottom of the steps, I had got him into an unalterable conviction that whatever odd ideas might come into a man's head when he was shut up alone with his books, a healthy dose of real life, by which he meant the bus and the newsboy, was enough to show him that all that sort of thing just couldn't be true. You begin to see the point. Thanks to processes which we set at work in them centuries ago, they find it all but impossible to believe in the unfamiliar while the familiar is before their eyes. Keep pressing home on him the ordinariness of things. Above all, do not attempt to use science, I mean the real science, as a defense against Christianity. They will positively encourage him to think about realities he can't touch and see. There have been sad cases among the modern physicists. If he must dabble in science, keep him on economics and sociology. Don't let him get away from that invaluable notion of real life. But the best of all is to let him read no science, but to give him a grand general idea that he knows it all, and that everything he happens to have picked up in casual talk and reading is the result of modern investigation. Do remember, you are there to fuddle him. From the way some of you young fiends talk, anyone would suppose it was our job to teach. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. I love these Screwtape letters because they just capture so much of going on. So that's just a little story for you to have to capture your imagination. All right, so now this is what I'm going to do. I get to talk to you now a little bit about the steps. Actually, I'm going to just take a little breather and let that story sit in for you for a while, because it's a good story, isn't it? Well, I erased the board. In the old days, you were able to do this with chalk and a cloth eraser, and it just clapped it together, and it was super easy. I think these whiteboards are a little harder, at least for me. What I'd like to do now is just share with you the steps of the RCIA program. And there are 4 main steps to bear in mind. Screwtape advised against allowing the Christian to think, to ask questions, but instead to convince a person that they already know the important things and everything else is nonsense or not real. Well, the RCIA takes the opposite stand. We want you to think, to ask questions, to wonder. The first step of the RCIA is known as the pre-catechumenate. During that period of the pre-catechumenate, this is what we ask you to do. We ask you to be inquirers, inquisitive about the thoughts and ideas, testing them out, thinking them through. You recall the word I used earlier, catechesis? Well, this is the step before you choose to be indoctrinated, to have the teaching handed on to you. This handing on of the teaching we call tradition, from the Latin tradere, which simply means to hand on. In the pre-catechumenate, you are meant to explore, to ask, and most importantly, to think. The next step is where you receive the tradition. So all of this is in preparation to receive the tradition. And that next step is known as, I'm going to cheat, it's known as if this was the pre-catechumenate, it's going to be the catechumenate. So I don't have to write it all out. So the next stage is catechumenate. So 1, 2. Very good. Now at this point, a person will have chosen to proceed in your formation as a Christian. So during the catechumenate, you've made a choice to journey further. And in December, there will be a celebration, which is the rite of acceptance. It is at that point that those of you who have discerned that this is where God is calling you, state your intentions. It's a key step. And you are enrolled in the order of catechumens. It is a way in which we journey together. Now, the third step is known as enlightenment. And what we invite you to do at that point in terms of this RCIA process is that a person will have chosen to proceed in your formation as a Christian. At that point, you've made a choice to go forward. And in December, there will be a celebration, and during that time, we move into the season of Lent. So here is where the church enters the holy season of Lent, a time of prayer, of fasting, of almsgiving, a period of time when the Holy Spirit enlightens both your mind and your heart to fully discern if you wish to commit yourself to be baptized. If you wish to commit yourself to be baptized in the church. Now, for those who are already baptized, it is a choice to be received into the church and join those who are being confirmed into the Catholic faith. This will take place in February in a ceremony where you are sent from our parish, St. Isidore's, to join all the others throughout the diocese who are in the RCIA program to Salina, to join with the bishop in the Cathedral of the Sacred Heart for the rite of election. You're being chosen by God to enter the church at the Easter mysteries, which take place at the great Easter Vigil. So at this point, you've made an even further commitment, and you have chosen to enter into the church. Now, at the Easter Vigil, when you're baptized and received into the church, you become a full member of the church. But there's an added stage to the RCIA that we often forget about, and indeed all Christians, all Catholics are in that stage. And that is called mystagogia. Now this is one you can use at the bar if you want a word that's going to really stump people. Hey, can you tell me what mystagogia is all about? No. Mystagogia is a wonderful Greek word, and it simply means this: that you learn the mystery by living the mystery. Once you're baptized and received into the church, that season from Easter through Pentecost is a time in which the mystery takes deeper shape. All of us, when we've learned something, we know that it's in practicing or living it out that we acquire the skills. And so too in our Christian life, the whole of the rest of our Christian life is a period of living the mystery so that we grow in our understanding of it. That stage is lifelong. That is meant to be something that is constantly, no matter how old, no matter how young you are, to continue to grow and explore what the mystery of your faith is. So it's initiated at Easter and continues through Pentecost, and then it's meant to be lived your entire life. The word mystagogia is Greek, and it simply means, as I said, to learn about mystery by living the mystery. By living the mystery. I like to use this as an example. Anyone who gets married kind of has an understanding of what marriage is, you know, but after you're married, you're living the mystery. And you begin to understand more of what that really and truthfully means. So too, you're seeking to enter the church and you're baptized and received into the church, but all of us as Christians, in living it out, come to get a fuller understanding of what the mystery is all about. So as we begin this process, this journey, I'd like to say a few words about why the Catholic Church sees the rite of Christian initiation as directed at adult believers. Our target, our sense is that we want you as an adult believer to make a choice. We don't want you to be forced. We don't want you to do it because parents are forcing you to do it. We don't want you to even do it because your girlfriend or boyfriend are telling you you have to do it. It has to be an adult choice on your part. So none of us would fit into the shoes we wore when we were 5 or 6 years old. I mean, it's just crazy to think that you could do that. We know that we have outgrown them, but still many adults try to fit religion into the understanding they had when they were children. We need to find an adult way to live our faith, to find adult ways to talk about God. To talk about God is what we call theology. And again, it's from the Greek word, theo, God, logos, words. Theology is how we're talking about God. St. Augustine in the 4th century knew that faith needed to be understood as best as we humans could. As best as we humans could. And in the 11th century, St. Anselm gave us an excellent definition or explanation of what theology is. And he said it is this: faith seeking understanding. Just let that set in for a moment. Theology is faith seeking understanding. It's not a bunch of textbooks. It's about faith seeking to be understood. And people who are engaged in that process of trying to understand their faith may write about it. They may draw paintings They may write poetry. All of those are ways in which expression is given to what they understand their faith to mean and the significance of that. Now, St. Thomas Aquinas, who was a Dominican, so yay, that's the home team, rah, 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 rah. So, and he is one of Christendom's great thinkers. He's remained so for a number of centuries. But he said this: to know a thing rightly is to know it in its causes. To know a thing rightly is to know it in its causes. Not the symptoms, but to know the underlying cause. Now, Screwtape would not agree. He would not agree with that statement at all. So, you may have heard of the Baltimore Catechism. The Baltimore Catechism was the way people of my vintage and older, so old folks like me and older, had to learn by memory questions and answers. It was a series as a child, a little child in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, that you had to learn the question and the answer and to be able to parrot it back, to tell it back. And now, in its defense, I have to say that it was theologically solid. A little 5-year-old could give a theological disputation that would stand up with any university professor. But at 5 or 6 years old, you didn't really understand what you were saying. So the mistake was to think that a 5 or 6-year-old could understand the Baltimore Catechism, when in fact, what's really important is that now, years later, decades later, I can remember some of those Baltimore Catechism questions, and they stand out to me as explaining so much. One question in particular was question 6, and it's always stayed with me. It went like this: why did God make you? Now imagine a 6, 7, 8-year-old being asked that question, why did God make me? You know? How would you even answer it today as an adult? Why did God make me? Oh, I don't know. kind of. But the answer that we had to learn, and this is the thing that always comes back to me, God made me to know Him, to love Him, and to serve Him in this world, and to be happy with Him forever in heaven. Knowing and loving and serving captures so much of what our Christian vocation is all about. To know, to love, and to serve. And that's all ordered to a relationship with God, a blessedness in heaven. Now you have to admit, that is pretty deep and darn good answer to why God made me. So the Baltimore Catechism had some wonderful things: to know, to love, and to serve. So we, in terms of our being created, are called to know and to love and to serve. So not only our questions are important, the questions that we have are important, but the answers too are critical. Not because they put an end or dismiss the question. The answer isn't important because it does away with the question or stops us questioning, but because they help us know reality in a meaningful way. The answers help us to know reality in a much more meaningful way. So I want to talk to you about knowing. Knowing. Wow, this is great. Here is a question to ponder. I'm going to have you put on your philosopher's caps, not like the Harry Potter's naming hat, or I want you to put on your thinker's hat here. So I want you to listen to this question. How do you know what you know when you know that you know? How do you know what you know when you know that you know? You know? All of us really know when we know that we know what we know. But how do you know that you know what you know when you know? That question of our knowledge, that question of understanding, is extremely important on this journey of faith. Because we're talking about a way of knowing God. And out of that knowing, of loving God. And out of that knowing and loving God, a way of serving God. So what do you think of this statement? I just want you to think of this for a moment. You can't love what you do not know. You can't love what you do not know. Now, St. Thomas Aquinas makes us realize that true love comes from right knowing. It's easy to love or think we love what we don't know. A kind of fictional perfect spouse or perfect partner. I love that. So that's the difficulty in terms of loving the thing as it is and knowing it as it truly is. Now, the French philosopher Voltaire, a great atheist, said this: I love humanity. It's people I can't stand. It's easy to love the abstract, the things that we know little about. But it's more difficult, and the more perfect love is in knowing the things as they are. Love is made real when we know. And I don't mean a factual knowing, this 2 + 2 = 4, or an empirical kind of knowing. But we have to talk about a different kind of knowing. In foreign languages, in Spanish and in German, there's a difference in the verb to know. So when we know facts about things, you use one word, but when you know another person, you know in a different way. So in Spanish, the difference between saber, to know things or facts, and conocer, to have a familiarity, a knowledge that is a familiarity. Or in German, it's between wissen, a kind of scientific knowing, and kennen. You never say, ich weiß ein Freund. You always say, ich kenne ein Freund. I know a friend, and it's a different kind of knowing. So that's going to be important for us on this journey, because we're trying to know something about what a mystery is calling us into. So even the things we love are loved because they want to share with us their truth. We're drawn to a thing and we love it because it wants to share with us its goodness. Stop and think about that. The beloved, of its nature, longs to be known. The beloved, of its very nature, longs to be known. Now, St. Thomas Aquinas, and again, for having lived in the 13th century, and he died at only 49 years of age, and he wrote tons of work, truly inspired works and thoughts about God. He tells us that we have 3 ways in which we know, or 3 bodies of knowledge that are different but essential to a full life. And I think this is critical for us because we have misunderstood what it means to know something. We presume that the only kind of genuine, valid knowledge is what? Scientific knowledge. We presume it's scientific knowledge. So Thomas says to us, one way in which we know, a body of knowledge that we have, that we acquire and we operate out of, is scientia, is science. Science has validity. 2 + 2 = 4. That's a great empirical, provable kind of thing. So we do need kind of scientific knowledge. And Christianity and this RCIA journey of faith is not to dismiss what science is about. It's to say that it gives us a body of knowledge that helps us find a meaningful life. So scientific knowledge tends to be the empirical and verifiable. How many of you are in love with somebody? Just a show of hands. How do you know? Do you know in a scientific way that you love this person? Heck no. Heck no. So there's another way in which we know. And Thomas calls this opinio. And you can kind of just throw an N on it, you got opinion. And that's what it means. Vanilla ice cream is better than chocolate. Vanilla ice cream is better than chocolate. Now that's a body of knowledge that I hold as true. I function my life. When I go to the ice cream place, I'll get vanilla because it's better than chocolate. But that's an opinion that I hold. And opinions that we hold tend to be personal. They're questionable, but they're real. Most of our voting and political campaigns is premised upon opinion. There is no sense of having a scientific proof to it. It's just simply a matter of the fact that this is a personal choice. You may question it, but it has validity and reality for me. So there are opinions. All of us function with opinions. That's a true thing. And it's a valid part of how we process our world. So science is one way of knowing. An opinion is another way of knowing. But Thomas tells us that there's a third way of knowing, which is fides, faith. We know by faith. I believe you. That's a very different kind of statement than 2 plus 2 equals 4, or vanilla is better than chocolate. Bless you. I believe you love me. That's a different kind of a statement. So why can I make those statements and have them meaningful? I love you, and I believe that you love me. That's a body of truth. I trust in that, and I work with that. I can't prove it, and it is more than opinion. So think of this example. Jurors put their faith in the testimony of a witness. He or she is judged to be credible. So when we have faith because we put our trust in the testimony of another, in the witness of another. Faith is personal trust that is based on the credible testimony of one we trust. That's an important thing for us to understand. Faith is not fairy tales. Faith is trusting and believing on a credible testimony of another. So, I'm going to have you do a little exercise here. I'm going to give you the background, so I want you to kind of get a little physical, aerobic exercise. You know, this is your kind of workout. So, I want there to be 3 groups. We're going to have 3 groups. And within each of the 3 groups, I want you to break down into smaller clusters, maybe 3 to 5 people. So the first group, group 1, is going to be all the team members. Just show a hand of the team members here tonight. So the team members, I want you to go over on that side of the room. And then all of you who are here as inquirers, and by that I mean those asking about baptism or confirmation, or you just want to better understand your Catholic faith. Just show hands of those people that fall in that kind of, great. I want you to just kind of come in this center section, and again, cluster into groups of 3 to 5, so there are more of you. But I tell you to go, not just yet. And then the third group is who are sponsors that are here tonight, just a show of hands. I'm going to ask the sponsors all to go over this group, and you can leave your stuff where it is, because it's just going to be a short little experiment, a little exercise, and you'll come back to your place. So don't feel insecure. Your things will be there. So group 1 sponsors, group 2 inquirers, and group 3 are, team members, inquirers, and sponsors. You got to split up. There's a nice young man sitting here for you. All right. One of the things about a little experiment like that is it was an exercise in trust, even the people you were standing with. Kind of moving away from your safety zone and then being with people that you don't know and learning to kind of open up and trust. This is the final thought I want to leave you with. RCIA is about trust. But in what are we trusting? What is it we're putting our trust in? The thing to remember about what we trust in is this: God's revelation. God's revelation. God's self-disclosure to us. That's what we're trusting in. That God loves us so much that God desires to share who He is, the mystery of what God is with each one of us. So we're trusting that in our lives and in our journey there is a disclosure. It's almost a courtship, a love affair that God has with us to share who that person is. It's also trusting in the testimony of those who knew Him. The people in our lives who you say, that person really knows the living Lord. That person is a person who's charitable and loving and kind and forgiving and merciful. That person is a person who I think really has a sense of who the mystery of God is in their life. And so we put our trust in the testimony of those who know Him, who truly believe. So the question then is, if we're trusting in the self-disclosure of God, what are the sources for us to pay attention to this coming year that are the sources, the ways in which God discloses Himself to us? Well, first and foremost, I would say the clearest and fullest disclosure of God is in Jesus Christ. Here's a person who entered into our world and revealed to us the love of the Father, a sense of our being sons and daughters, brothers and sisters. There is a self-disclosure that takes place in our coming to know who Jesus is, of reading the Scriptures and learning about him, of talking with one another about who Jesus is. And that's how God is disclosing himself, in the true reality of who Jesus Christ is, not in our make-believe notions of who Jesus is, but in the living Lord who calls us by name. The other place in which we find there is God's disclosure is in the sacred Scriptures. When you sit down and read the Old Testament or the New Testament. Now, St. Augustine was an incredibly wretched young man. He lived a very wild life. But his point of conversion came one day when he, just out of exasperation because he felt he was going absolutely nowhere, picked up a Bible and opened it, and his eyes fell upon a passage that changed his life. So there was a revelation for him that had a deep meaning. Now, if you want to look at it from a scientific point of view, it was nonsense. You can have the opinion that it was just folly. But from the point of view of faith, there was a disclosure to that person that changed his life. So it is through sacred Scriptures. It's also through the people who know him, who know the living Lord. I want you to think of all the incredible holy women and men that you've known. It may be grandparents or parents. It might be aunts or uncles. It might be neighbors or co-workers. These women and men who you know who just embody a kind of holiness. And they share with you a sense of who the mystery of what God is all about. They're disclosing. Not only people in this generation, but people centuries from the past continue to reveal to us what it is that God is about. It's not only in the sense of the people that knew him and that are holy women and men, but it's in the body of Christ, the church that's founded by Christ and in Christ. There's a mystery that calls us together into relationship. You look at church on any Sunday and you look at the various people there and you wonder how they actually get along. One theologian said the mystery of the Catholic Church is that we've got so many different people that somehow, even with all that opposition and conflict, it still stays together. The mystery of the Spirit is the unity that it brings forth from such diversity. So there's a disclosure of God even when we're fighting with one another, even when we're debating and arguing. There's a disclosure of God. Remember in the Scriptures it says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there in the midst. We need community. It's not me and Jesus. It's not just me and God. Jesus is present in the midst of us gathered as community. Another source of revelation, or where God discloses himself for us to pay attention, and we'll learn more and more about this as the year goes on, is inspiring text and context. You know, after the resurrection, after Jesus, the early church suffered great persecution. You know, we can get a sense of what that persecution is in terms of the Middle East now, and the execution of Christians, the struggle that Christians are being displaced. That was the experience of the early church. And to read the writings of those women and men who gave witness to what their faith was, even to the point of martyrdom. There's a disclosure of who God is in the lives of those individuals. And centuries later, as people became less persecuted, the way in which Christians came to understand more fully what the Bible was telling them and what Jesus' gospel was all about. So there's a disclosure in coming to know the early church writers. There's also a way in which God discloses himself in the spiritual and uplifting writings. And here's where literature through history, has a capacity to disclose something of the mystery of God. It is, too, in sacred spaces and holy places. One of the nice things about the time I lived in Belgium and the time I lived in England was to go to some of these ancient medieval churches and you walk into the space and you're transformed by the space itself. There was a real love and dedication that the architects put into that space to make it speak of a reality of God, to disclose a reality of God that they knew in their hearts and in their lives. Artists, too, that sacred space that they create on a canvas is another way in which God is disclosing himself to us. But it's also then for us to appreciate this, because in America we are rugged individualists. And that's going to be the downfall of us. That sense of it's only about me. But here's where God really fully tends to disclose himself, and it's within the community of believers. Do you recall, any of you, 9/11 with the attack on the World Trade Center? Do you recall how we as a nation really became a community? And we forgot that. We forgot that. Do you realize during that time how God was being disclosed in people's lives? How reconciliation was taking place between people who did not get along with one another? So there really is something about the disclosure of God in the community of believers. And lastly, this is the most important thing I want you to hold on to. Where God's self-disclosure, where God's revelation is taking place that you are to be utmost aware of, is in the depths of a person, in the very soul of who you are. There, God speaks to us in the chambers of our hearts. And there is a disclosure that's taking place. So it's about trust. And trusting this disclosure that God has made in the person of Jesus Christ, in the holy women and men, in the sacred writings that are handed on to us, in the holy places, and in the community of believers, and most importantly, in the depths of our true self, the soul of a person. So that's it for this first week, your introduction. I want you to pay attention that next week you have to read the section on God. It's about 4 pages. And so you can probably handle that. I think that's going to be an easy read. And what's really wonderful is with your sponsor, read them and then chat about it. And you'll see at the end of the section there's a kind of discussion question there. Be sure if you have whether you have them filled out or not, finish filling out the goldenrod papers that have your contact information and then your sponsor on the back. We need to collect these. So if you're a person who's an inquirer and your sponsor is filled out on the back side, you're good as goldenrod. You're good as goldenrod. So to be able to turn that in, I think tonight we've been able to hook everybody up with the sponsor. So tonight it should all work out. And so just enjoy. Before you leave here, grab any last little bits of these goodies. But know that they're going to be here every week. Every week. So thank you so much. And safe travel. God bless.